know what is WTO? I would like to give a short introduction of the World Trade Organization, WTO. WTO is the only global international organization dealing with the rule of trade between nations. The organization deals with regulation of trade between participating countries by providing a framework for negotiating and formalizing trade agreements, which are signed by representatives of members, government, and approved by their parliaments. The goal is to help producers of goods and services, exporters and importers conduct their business. The organization officially started on 1st January 1995 under Marrakech Agreement, replacing the General Agreement of Tariff and Trade (GATT), which started in 1948. WTO includes 153 countries and the headquarters in Zurich, Switzerland. The WTO has been used to push an extensive array of policies on trade, investment, and deregulation that make worse the inequality between the North and the South and among the rich and poor within countries. The three official languages of the WTO are English, French, and Spanish.
The WTO's main activities are: the first is negotiating the reduction or elimination of obstacles to trade or agreeing on rules governing the conduct of international trade. The second is to monitor the application of WTO's agreed rules of trade in goods, trade in services, and trade-related intellectual property rights. The third is building capacity of developing country government officials in international trade matters. The fourth is conducting economic research and collecting trade data in support of the WTO other main activity. And the last is explaining to and educating the public about the WTO, its mission and its activities.
Okay, the important objective of WTO is: first is to improve the standard of living people in the member countries. Second, to ensure full payment and broad increase in effective demand. Third, to enlarge production and trade of goods. Fourth, to increase the trade of service. To ensure optimum utilization of world resources and to protect environment. And the last one is to accept the concept of sustainable development.
WTO will not make us safer. The WTO would like you to believe that creating a world of free trade will promote global understanding and peace. On the contrary, the domination of international trade by rich countries for the benefit of their individual interests fuel anger and resentment that make us less safe. To build real global security, we need international agreements that respect people's rights to democracy and trade system that promote global justice.
Rules put the rights of cooperation to profit over humans and labor rights. The WTO encouraged a race to the bottoms in which by pitting workers against each other rather than promoting internationally recognized labor standards. The WTO has ruled that it is illegal for a government to ban a product based on the way it is produced, such as with child labor. It has also rules that government cannot take into account non-commercial values such as human rights or the behavior of companies that do business with vicious dictatorship such as Burma when making purchasing decisions.
WTO increasing hunger. Farmers produce enough food in the world to feed everyone, yet because of corporate control of food distribution, as many as 800 million people worldwide suffer from chronic malnutrition. According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, food is a human right. In developing countries, as many as 4 out of every 5 people make their living from the land. But the leading principle in the WTO's agreement on agriculture is that market forces should control agriculture policies rather than a rational commitment to guarantee food security and maintain decent family farmer income. WTO policies have allowed dumping of heavily subsidized industrially provide food into poor countries, undermining local production and increasing hunger.
The WTO fears defense of TRIPS, which is trade-related intellectual property rights such as patents, copyrights and trademarks, comes at the expense of health and human life. The WTO has protected for pharmaceutical companies' right to profits against governments seeking to protect their people's health by providing life-saving medicines in countries in areas like sub-Saharan Africa, where thousands die every day from HIV and AIDS. Developing countries won an important victory in 2001 when they affirmed the right to produce generic drugs or import them if they lack production capacity so that they could provide essential life-saving medicines to their populations less expensively. Unfortunately, in September 2003, many new conditions were agreed to that will make it more difficult for countries to produce those drugs. Once again, the WTO demonstrates that it favors corporate profits over humans' life.
Bad about WTO is WTO would privatize essential public service like education, healthcare, energy and water. Privatize here means the selling of public assets such as radio, airwave or schools to private corporation, usually foreign corporation to run for profit rather than the public good. The WTO's General Agreement on Trade in Services, or we call it as GATS, includes a list of about 160 treated services, including elder and child care, sewage, garbage, park maintenance, telecommunications, constructions, banking, insurance, transportation, shipping, postal services, and tourism. In some countries, this matter, I mean privatization, is already happening. Those least able to pay for vital services, working class communities and communities of color are the ones who suffer the most.
The WTO has poor small countries in favor of rich powerful nations. The WTO supposedly operates on a consensus basis with equal decision making power for all. In reality, many important decisions get made in a process whereby poor countries' negotiations are not even invited to close door meetings. And then agreement are announces that poor countries didn't not even know were being discussed.
by corporations to dismantle hardware local and national environmental protections, which are attacked as barriers to trade. The very first WTO panel ruled that a provision of the US Clean Air Act requiring both domestic and foreign producers alike to produce cleaner gasoline was illegal. The WTO declared illegal a provision of the Endangered Species Act that coped with an inexpensive device allowing endangered sea turtles to escape. The WTO is attempting to deregulate industries including logging, fishing, water utilities, and energy distribution, which will lead to further exploitation of this natural resource.
The tide is turning against free trade and WTO. International opposition to WTO is growing. Massive protests in Seattle of 1999 brought over 50,000 people together to oppose the WTO and succeeded in shutting the meeting down. When the WTO met in 2001, the trade negotiators were unable to meet their goals of expanding the WTO reach. In Mexico, Hong Kong, and China, the WTO met thousands of activists in protest, scoring a major victory for democracy. Developing countries refused to give in the rich countries' agenda of WTO's expansion and caused the talks to collapse.
Hey guys, have you watched the video? Awesome, right? Okay, first of all, I need to get all of you out of confusion. I mean, some of you might ask, did WTO really kill people by that? By ambushing them and suddenly slaughtered them? Of course not. But the fact is, WTO still kills people. We did not literally mean that WTO killed people by that way, but we showed it as a metaphor. In its years of existence, the World Trade Organization has established a set of global trade and commerce rules that benefit mostly transnational corporations while ignoring the needs of communities, workers, and environment. That is why thousands of protesters rise against the WTO. From this video, we attempt to show all of you what are the cons of WTO, and hopefully you guys can see clearly what it is all about. Thank you.